Well, thank you for joining us for our Parenting Generation Screen workshop. We were looking forward to meeting in person, but because of the storm, we decided to do an online version, a digital version of the workshop. I'm excited to introduce you again, Jonathan McKee. He's an author of almost 30 books, helping parents, helping teenagers navigate this screen world. One of his most popular books, Parenting Generation Screen, is one that has been very impactful for me and my family personally. He has 30 years plus of youth ministry experience, traveling all over the world, speaking to leaders and parents. And he and his wife, Lori, reside in California with their 3 children. I'm excited to introduce to you Jonathan McKee.
Hey, thank you, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having someone all the way from California. And I especially feel so welcomed by Debbie, the tropical storm. So, hey, I'm sorry that I don't get to see many of you personally, but I got to see so many of you this morning, which was really cool. And I'm glad to be here. This is exciting. I'm glad that the show is going on, even though Debbie is here. We're talking about Parenting Generation Screen. And this morning, in case you weren't here, that's okay. Just a quick highlight, just taking a couple minutes to talk about some of the things we talked about. Because as we talked about this device right here, one of the things I said out of the gates was, it's not like this device is bad or evil. This device is actually very handy. And one of the statements I made is, this device is great for connecting with people outside the room when it doesn't interfere with our relationships with the people inside the room. And then we took a little dive through history. And by that, I went back to 2007 when a guy walked out on stage and said, we're going to reinvent the phone. And the release of the iPhone started basically kind of the smartphone obsession in the US. And then I mentioned how by 2012, 50% of people in the US had smartphones in their pocket, including young people. So that meant a lot of young people. And by young people, I mean young people having those in their pockets. And it changed so many things. One of the things we touched on is it changed the way we communicate. Where young people sometimes used to be together, interacting with each other in face-to-face relationships. Now, very often, they're on a screen talking with someone, ignoring the person next to them. Another way it affects young people is, of course, and this isn't just alone with young people, this is really anybody on social media, is very often sometimes, now instead of just an enjoying event, we actually, instead of just enjoying the event, we have to also post about the event. Sometimes this creates pressure of like thinking of trying to get that perfect Instagram picture, for the event. When we eat pizza, let's make sure we post about the pizza. But that's where we get to something that a lot of people aren't talking about, and that is the moment after the post. The moment where all of a sudden we're like, how come people aren't liking what I just posted? How come I don't have as many followers? And this is putting a lot of pressure on especially young people in the social media world. And because of that, the thing I shared this morning, I'll share with you again now, is we're starting to see all kinds of research showing that depression, for some reason, right around the time that smartphones got in our pockets, has had this huge rise. Teen suicide has this huge rise. And a lot of these studies saying the same things, which is, the more screen time, the more stressed out young people are. And by the way, we're going to talk about that a little bit. One report, for example, said that, if you were over 8 hours a day on screen times, then that those people were twice as likely to be depressed. Well, this is kind of discouraging when the average amount of time that a young person spends on a screen is over 8 hours a day. No wonder we got so many people depressed. So as we're starting to raise awareness about this, even the Surgeon General has come out and said, hey, perhaps we should start paying attention. In a world where we've been giving warnings to young people for a long time, like don't bring your phone in the bedroom. Your family doctor's been saying that for literally decades. And believe it or not, 79% of young people bring their phone into the bedroom each night. So we touched on some of that this morning. And if you missed it, that's okay. I just caught you up. And now what we're talking about is, how do we parent Generation Screen? So whether you're a mom, a dad, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, a teacher, someone who cares about this generation growing up, what is some practical help that possibly we could offer when it comes to raising this next generation? Well, I'll tell you what, if you're at home, I encourage you, grab something to write with, because I'm going to give you 5 tips on raising Generation Screen. Number 1, it's very simple. I'm going to start with the basics, and this is yet so vital and so important, and that is getting face-to-face in a screen-to-screen world. And notice when I say getting face-to-face in a screen-to-screen world, one thing I'm just commenting on is screen-to-screen. Parents are on screen. Kids are on screen. We're all on screens. And sometimes, I mean, how many times have you been sitting in a restaurant and you look around and you see a family sitting over there and dad's on a screen, mom's on a screen, brother's on a screen, sister's on a screen. Everybody's staring at their own screens. You're like, why are you even at the same place for dinner? You might as well just, order DoorDash and stay in your room. I mean, nobody's talking to each other. I'm saying in a world like that, what if we actually put down our devices every once in a while and just got face-to-face with the people we love? Moms, dads, what if we got face-to-face with our kids? Moms, think of the times you had with your daughters where before bedtime, maybe you're tucking them in and your daughter looks up at you and says, Mom, when you were my age, did anybody ever say things about you that weren't true? And then for the next 15 or 20 minutes, you have some amazing conversation. And I know that only happens twice a year. But, what if we really tried to just proactively find moments where we really put our own devices down and engage with our kids? What if we looked for moments where we found these communication arenas where sometimes, just conversation comes up? One of the things I really like to do is with my own kids, I always would, I found that they talked a lot if we had food in the picture, whether it be cookie dough or ice cream or whatever, which is why I gained so much weight. I was a good parent. But what if you'd sit over a Sunday and the two of you just, also, when you got sticky hands from a sundae or whatever, it's hard to have your phone in your hand as well. And so sometimes I found that, with food, conversation would come up. During COVID, a lot of us all of a sudden, found that, hey, if you went to Home Depot and bought a fire pit, you could have a fire pit in the backyard. And who knows, you'd sit around and all of a sudden under the stars, look up at stars and hang out and talk with each other. Some of you guys have found that with game nights, that kind of stuff. Family dinners. We're going to talk about boundaries later in this workshop. One of those simple boundaries of no tech at the table. What if mom and dad included, we all put our tech, turned it off or put it somewhere out of reach of the dinner table and just made it a rule in our house? When we're at dinner, we're here, we're not looking at our screens. Find those moments, whatever those are, where you can get face-to-face in a screen-to-screen world. That's point number 1. Number 2, I have parents all the time that tell me, well, Jonathan, I would love to connect with my kids, but I don't even know what to say to them, in all honesty. They just live in a completely different world. And that's where I'm going to offer you something, and that's this, point number 2, take time to notice their world. Eddie mentioned that I've been in youth ministry world for a while. I do school assemblies. School assemblies is the worst speaking gig ever, okay? I just promise you. Stand up and try to entertain a bunch of kids that are like, hey, we can make this guy's life miserable by not listening and throwing things at him. No, school assemblies are really not that great things, but when I would go around and do school assemblies, I learned one of the things that would really help me kind of understand their world was taking time to really kind of get into their world and notice what was going on a little bit to make sure that I was relevant in what I was talking about. So even though I'd done research and I kind of knew what they were watching and what they were listening to, another thing I just did is I literally hung out with young people at that school before I spoke. I remember once being in Canada and I was hanging out with a bunch of kids and I saw them and they're walking around. And I saw this one kid walk in and he had a shirt that said the Beatles right on the front of it. And so I walked up. I had never met this kid. I didn't even know what to say to this kid. So I immediately walked up and I started with this shirt. I'm like, hey, so are you a true Beatles fan, or did you just borrow Dad's shirt, or what? Yeah. He's like, no. I am truly a Beatles fan. I won't bore you with the conversation. But 5 minutes later, This guy is telling me every Beatles album he owns, the best song, the history of every, buddy in the band, and even the drummer before Ringo. I mean, I'm learning all this stuff, and I'm sitting there just going, more Beatles information than I ever wanted in my entire life. And I thought to myself, I won, because see, I always play a game. Whenever I'm talking with young people, my goal is to get them talking about what they want to talk about so much that it drives me nuts and I don't get a word in edgewise. And you know what's funny? When I play that game, I almost always win. Because you know why? Nobody listens to kids today. It's a sad fact. But the fact is, most kids, if I start a conversation with them, I can get them talking because I quickly start asking them questions about what's on their shirt, about, whatever's going on, and my goal is to get them talking and me listening. And it starts with just noticing. Now, as moms and dads, sometimes we sit there and we see our kids on a screen, and it's very easy to kind of fall into that rut of just, hey, turn off that screen. What if instead we were like, hey, what you playing? Can I play too? Hey, what you watching? Can I watch? It's called co-viewing. Matter of fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics talks about that and talks about how parents can co-view, which is understanding what your kids are on their devices. And when I say understanding what our kids are on their devices, I know it's a tall order because we just talked about the fact that young people can spend over 8 hours a day on their devices. That's a lot of content to understand what they're watching. But anybody who is here watching this workshop right now, I just got to applaud you. You're getting an A+ in that category right now because you are saying, I care about this young person in my life, my grandkid, my son, my daughter, my nephew, my students. And because you care, you're like, tell me what's going on in their life. Take the time to notice. Because as we start looking into the world of young people, and as we start, for example, taking notice of the apps that they're using, we can learn a lot about them. So think about that for a second. Think about all these apps. I mean, and by the way, some people think it's so hard to keep up. Sure, there is. There's different ones that every once in a while, like you'll hear like, prequel, and you're like, I don't know what prequel is. It got popular because it had this cartoon face filter that a lot of young people like, or Shuffles by Pinterest, which kind of allowed, kind of artsy kids to create these mood bursts and stuff like that. So there's some obscure ones, but I mean, in all honesty though, think about it. When you look at the really big ones, or the popular ones, and you can actually do the research and find a list. I mean, it is at the top, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, and it varies. If you got a kid that's a gamer, Discord might be huge, Your daughter might be more into Instagram than your son is. I mean, it varies a little bit, but those are kind of the big ones. And how cool for us to kind of know a little bit about, hey, what apps do they have? What ones are the ones that they're using the most? And by attending a workshop like this, maybe you're also getting some of the research behind and understanding how those apps are affecting young people. And one of the biggest things that we're going to really talk about today is especially how social media is making young people feel because of the pressure it's creating. Now, for those people that heard me this morning, I mentioned something, I'm going to say it again, and that is that there is one number in social media that is really changing the way young people think about themselves. And what that number is that right there. Think about it. So much of social media is about how many people are liking what I post and how many people are following me. The follower thing has been really interesting in the last few years because right around COVID time, right around then, study after study was showing literally 8 out of 10 young people wanted to kind of be an influencer in some way. I use that word influencer. What that word simply means is I want to be someone who people follow. Maybe even that would be my job someday. I would be an Insta celeb. I would be a TikTok star. 8 out of 10 young people. I said that, and my friend Julie, who is a teacher of young people, like 3rd and 4th graders, she said, Jonathan, I can't tell you how much this is true. As a teacher, we always used to, one thing's when we have kids come up and share about themselves at the beginning of the year or whatever, and we always ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? With young people, it always used to be, I want to be a nurse. I want to be an astronaut, right? I want to be a dolphin trainer, all these cool things. And they say, now, she goes, easily 7 or 8 out of 10 are, I want to be a TikTok star. I want to be an Insta celeb. I want to be a YouTuber. These are kind of the aspirations of young people today. Why? I have a theory. And my theory is simply this, that one of the things that young people like to do online more than anything else is just simply watch funny videos. I mean, and let's be honest, I mean, sometimes it is cool. I mean, how many times have you got stuck where you're watching something and all of a sudden before you know it, 45 minutes pass because you're just sitting there watching silly videos, you know? Well, guess what? 8 out of 10 young people are like, I could do that. That could be my job. Well, understand this for a quick second. If all of a sudden we live in a world where a lot of young people want followers, because that's what you need if you're going to be an influencer, this number becomes very important, okay? Now, what's that mean? Some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to be the fact that when it comes to the time that young people spend on social media, not only is their mental health in jeopardy, but their physical safety can be in jeopardy. Let me elaborate how that number is affecting this. If you've got a lot of young people who are now walking around going, oh my gosh, I need more followers because I want to be a TikTok star. All of a sudden, that number of followers becomes so important that, I mean, one thing you do often is there used to be advice of, hey, why don't you really put some, why don't you set that particular app, because there's all kinds of different apps and there's all kinds of different ways to do it on the different apps, but pretty much most apps have the option to control who follows you. And you can either open up to where anybody can just click follow, or you can have it where they actually have to request. And some parents are like, hey, you can only, friend or connect with someone who actually knows you. Well, guess what? If you want a bunch of followers, you open up all the gates because you want as many followers as possible. And so now, for our young daughter, who's trying to get as many followers as possible, when she gets this guy reaching out to her, she's like, oh, that's awesome. This guy looks really nice. And what she doesn't realize is that this guy is really this guy. So here's the scary thing. Yeah, all of you at home right now, I could hear you through the TVs as you were going, yeah. Think about the ramifications of this. So let's talk about certain apps. Let's talk about Snapchat. Snapchat really came on the scene around 2012. By 2014, it was already getting its hands slapped because it was kind of setting itself up as a don't worry about what you post, which, by the way, is a whole nother dangerous thing we could talk about. Don't worry about what you post because these images disappear. Don't worry, you can post anything, they disappear. Well, the FTC literally was slapping Snapchat's hand because they're going, if these pictures disappear, how come these pictures are showing up everywhere? There was apps in the App Store where literally said, hey, do you want those pictures that disappeared out of the cache of your phone? Use this app to get them. Or nerdy guys at school were like, I can show you how to get those pictures back. So immediately Snapchat had some rules, like the simplest way that young people kept pictures is they would get someone to send a vulnerable pic of some sort, and you know what many of those could be, and they simply screenshotted that pic. Well, by 2014, Snapchat had to all of a sudden have a message appear that said, your picture was just screenshotted. Now, sure, that sounds great, but I mean, think about this. If by chance a young girl was convinced by her boyfriend, hey, why don't you just send me that sexy pic? We don't need to go into details, but we know what that could lead to. She sends said pic, and all of a sudden, there she's alone in her bedroom, 11 at night. She sends this, well, let's just say it's a nude. She sends a nude. All of a sudden, she sees on her screen, that picture was just screenshotted. When she sent it on Snapchat, thinking, no big deal, it disappeared. Well, at that point, she's all, you just screenshot it, and boyfriend's like, oh, it's just for me or whatever. Well, let me tell you, it happens all the time. I go to school assemblies, I'm about ready to speak, and I go, so what's going on in the school right now? And very often it's a story of a young girl who shared something, and then some guy, after they broke up, decided that he was mad at her, so he sent that picture to everybody. Look what a slut she is, blah, blah, blah. And she stops going to the school. She attempts suicide. I mean, the stories are too numerous to even count. Snapchat. Interesting, though, as we're talking about different types of predators. I'm talking about the scary guy that I just showed you, okay? So back from our little tangent, back to thinking about this. This scary dude. We live in a world where young people are now allowing anybody to follow. They're like, oh, cool, Ted Bundy wants to follow me. Yes, haha, another follower, right? They're allowing anybody, which is really weird because he's dead. But they'll allow anybody to follow him. So now you have all these followers. Now think about Snapchat. Snapchat has like this really cool thing called Snap Maps, and this stuff changes all the time. So before you know it, there's other features. It's amazing. But Snap Maps is a pretty cool thing where you could look at all your followers who opted into Snap Maps, and you could see exactly where they are. So if this young lady who now has that scary guy I showed you following her, and if she's opted into Snap Maps, now scary guy knows exactly where she is on a map at any moment. This isn't limited to just Snapchat. I mean, think about Instagram. Your daughter could be posting something on Instagram. Let me tell a personal story. One of my daughters in college was staying up late, studying for an exam. She's drawing on her Starbucks cup because she's an amazing artist. She takes a picture of it, posts it, and because it's pretty cool, she posts that she's at this coffee place. And it's like, studying late night for history, da-da-da. So I literally call her, I'm like, baby, you just posted where you are, and you're almost done studying, and you're about ready to go home. Watch out for white panel vans, And so, sorry, all you painters who have white panel vans. But the thing is, this is one of those things where we just got to have conversations with our kids about posting location, especially in a world where we're very careless about who's following us. Remember decades ago when there used to be school assemblies, or there used to be these public service messages to parents saying, do you know where your children are? Well, we wouldn't even ask that anymore. We know where our kids are. They're in their bedroom, sitting there staring at a screen, doing nothing. The question we should be asking now is, do you know who's following your kids? Because we live in a world where that number has grown very important. And the people that our young people are now connecting with is a little scary, to be honest. I'm using a lot of examples of young girls. Let's use an example of a young guy playing video games. The numbers show that both young girls and young guys like video games, but the numbers are way bigger for guys in video games. And whenever I do these parent workshops, I can't believe how many stories I've heard. When I've taught youth worker workshops about this, trying to equip youth workers how to talk with their young people about this. I remember I had a youth worker come up to me after this and said, okay, I'm at my nephew's house. My nephew's like 11. He's playing Fortnite. He's playing with all these strangers like you often do, and I'm playing with him. And there's some creepy dude with, a call sign of some anonymous number, and he's saying weird stuff, like creepy stuff, like asking like questions and kind of sexual innuendo and all this stuff. And finally I was like, hey dude, who are you? How old are you? And he said the dude just went boop and disappeared, and he was gone like that. Nobody knows who he was. I ask again, do you know who's following your kids? It's one of the things I talk to young people a lot about in school assemblies. It's one thing I talk about in my books. In this book, The Teen's Guide to Face-to-Face Connections in a Screen-to-Screen World. We spend a lot of time on it, and I actually even list out, hey, here's some things you could notice that is kind of predatory behavior. And I talk about the different type of predators, from that creepy dude at your school who's just, asking you to send inappropriate stuff, all the way to the stranger, all the way to the sex trafficker. Scary stuff. And that's why I constantly write about this with young people, is trying to raise awareness to think about who they're connecting to. Are you noticing that stuff? Are you taking notice of the apps they're using? Because many of those have ramifications that we should think about. So again, A+ for being at this workshop, for thinking about these things. Let's talk about another one. Let's talk about TikTok. And the reason I'm going to talk about TikTok is it is literally, at the moment, and this could change, but it's the #1 app young people are using. And it has been actually for quite a while. If you don't know what's on TikTok, again, I would, with your kids, just say, hey, show me. Just tell them sometime and look. And some of it, like, we could call it the innocent stuff. This would be the innocent stuff, right? It's just somebody dancing to music, And sometimes it's usually, today it's a girl in a half top, dancing kind of sexy, but not over the top, but kind of sexy, or a role model that they have, like, somebody like very wholesome, like Cardi B, I'm being sarcastic, giving them life advice. That's what you want, Cardi B giving your kids life advice. So TikTok is kind of interesting. You can follow videos, and honestly, TikTok can be funny. It can be funny videos about dogs. It can be, it's a cornucopia of different material. But I don't think I've ever spent more than 5 minutes on TikTok before I hear really inappropriate language, really bad music, or see some kind of sensual stuff. That's one thing just about TikTok. And by the way, you can even adjust the settings on different things. But let's not even talk about that for a second. Let's talk about actual safety of our kids here. Interesting thing, a little while ago, TikTok added more safety features. And I want to take a peek at those real quick. Let's break them down because we can learn a lot. And when I say take notice, I encourage you to take notice of the news. Subscribe to a blog from somebody who writes about this stuff all the time. I do radio with Focus on the Family's Plugged In team. And at Plugged In, they actually keep current on a lot of this different stuff if you go into pluggedin.com. And they talk about new apps that are coming out, new role models, and a bunch of this. You could literally, if you read a certain newspaper, often they'll have a technology section, and you could subscribe to get stuff so you find out updates. And one thing you would have found out is with TikTok, a little while ago, they made some changes. And it's interesting, one of the changes they made was that users between the age of 16 and 17 now have to actively switch their settings to enable direct messaging. Now, here's what I encourage you to do. When you look at some of these safety switches, and I'm gonna lead you through this really quick, but bear with me for a second. Let me ask you, why would TikTok all of a sudden change and say, okay, it used to be that 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, but now only 16 and 17-year-olds, all the way up to 16 and 17-year-olds. Below that, we're gonna find out in a second, but 16s and 17-year-olds even have to actually turn on direct messaging. Direct messaging is if a kid posts a video, someone can direct message them and say, great dancing, you look amazing in that half shirt, which I always say, thank you. So the thing is, if that were to happen, that direct messaging, you could turn off direct messaging so you aren't getting direct messaging from strangers going, I like your half shirt, because it's a little creepy. So it used to be that direct messaging was just turned on. Now, TikTok, after looking at safety and after getting a lot of pressure from parents and legislators, they're like, okay. Fine. We'll make it to where 16 and 17-year-olds actually have to turn that on now. The default will be that it's off, and they'd have to literally go and say, I can get direct messages from everybody. So beforehand, anybody could message them. Why is that a problem? Think about it. It's a problem because you got 16 and 17-year-olds trying to decipher who these people are that are messaging them and trying to navigate when someone messages them and says, hey, you look really good. We have a modeling school. Would you like to come for a tryout? Hey, connect with me. I see real talent. And by the way, I have a friend, LAPD, retired captain. He connected me with their ICAC department, Internet Crimes Against Children. And every once in a while, I used to take this stuff. And when I was about to go speak at a school, and I would sit there with the principal, we would pull up the school Instagram page, and we'd pull up different young people that follow, and I would literally go straight to their, to the comments and direct messages, depending on the app, because there's all kinds of different apps that do this, but like on Instagram, and I would see some of these creepy comments from strangers, and I sometimes screenshotted it and sent it to this person I met at ICAC, LAPD ICAC, and they'd be like, oh yeah, no, that's not a modeling agency. That's somebody asking for pictures or this or that. Some creepy stuff, messages being sent. Well, guess what? TikTok realized 16 and 17-year-olds aren't quite ready to navigate this yet. So let's at least make it to where at least they turn that on. Parents, think about that for a second. A lot of us are handing devices to 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And they lie about their age if they're 10 or 12, or they're 13 and they just tell their age, and they get on TikTok, because you have to be 13 to be on TikTok, and immediately they're getting bombarded with messages from adults, maybe even that creepy dude I showed you the picture of, saying, hey, you look really good. Hey, what you just shared in that post, I relate to that. My parents are like that too. And this relationship develops. And I could tell you story after story. And as a matter of fact, in my books to young people, I tell many of those stories about a young girl who connected with that young guy who said he was 15, come to find out he was 30, who she sneaks out of the house one night, goes and meets him in the Walmart parking lot where he said, let's meet. And it turns out definitely wasn't, the 15 or the 17-year-old guy she thought she was gonna go meet. We need to talk to our kids about this. We need to start thinking about this. TikTok realized even 16 and 17, let's not make this a default. Matter of fact, and by the way, then they released a public service statement saying, we care about kids, blah, 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 blah. They don't. Oh, wait, we're posting this online. Yes, you guys do TikTok. You guys are very responsible. Look at those users under 16 don't even have access to direct messages. So they're saying 15-year-olds and younger, we're not even gonna allow them to turn direct messages on. By the way, if a 13-year-old or 14-year-old wants direct messages, if an 11-year-old wants direct messages, you know what they do? Just change their birth date to where, hey, look, now I'm 16, this is great. But the fact that TikTok went through this, you guys, this is one of those perfect opportunities for us as a parent or somebody to go, hey guys, why did TikTok make it to where 16-year-olds don't have access to direct messages? Just ask your kids that. It's kind of fascinating to engage in that conversation. Teens 13 to 15 won't receive push notifications after 9 p.m. 16, 17 won't receive push notifications after 10 p.m. In other words, why are we letting young people get notifications to stay on their device longer late at night? So we can kind of learn a lot from this different stuff, from a lot of these different pop-up warnings. Take time to notice this, because our kids are spending a lot of time on their screens. They're flowing a lot of stuff through their headphones, right? They're playing a lot of games, meeting a lot of people while playing those games. These devices are some of their favorite things. And I'll ask you again, who's following your kids? Take the time to notice. Now, we've spent a little bit of time here. We've spent, probably a third of the workshop. And I know some of you at home right now are saying, Jonathan, thank you, but this is the most depressing workshop I've ever been to in my life, all right? Come on. I'm gonna go grab my kid's phone and I'm gonna flush it down the toilet, all right? Some creepy fat naked guy's following my daughter because she wants followers? Forget it. And you wanna lose it right now. And that's why, pay attention, folks. Don't hit the pause button. Don't go flush your kid's phone down the toilet. Instead, ready? Number 3, here's a tip I have for you. Connection before correction. Connection before correction. And folks, let me tell you, this is really truly from personal experience. I wrote a book called If I Had a Parenting Do-Over. And I asked hundreds of parents one question. If you could go back in time and you could change one parenting practice, what would you do over? And not only were the answers eye-opening, but we started to see some common denominators. And it was amazing how many parents shared, I wish I wouldn't have overreacted so much. I had been working on a relationship with my kid and everything, and all of a sudden they did something, and maybe they even did something truly, absolutely disobedient, and I blew it, and I could see the picture. I blew my top, and I could see it on my kid's face. Mom's not safe. Dad's not safe. And so before we go freak out, I'm just gonna say this, you guys, we need to think a lot about our reactions. Don't get me wrong, I'm not that guy up here saying, let your kids watch whatever they want, let them do whatever they want, I'm not saying to raise little Miley Cyrus's. Oops, did I say that out loud? Maybe we should edit that out. But I'm just saying, let's be careful of our reactions. I mean, it's interesting when it comes to these moments and you think back on them. I can share you some stories from my own parenting where I completely, absolutely overreacted. And sometimes it was because my kids disobeyed. Let me just prep you. Your kids are gonna do stuff with their screens that's gonna make you upset. I mean, there's this thing called Google, and our kids can go and they can type things in there that maybe would make us shudder. And then they're gonna see images of things that might also make us shudder, right? Well, how are you gonna react to those things? Let's talk about connection before correction. And what I simply mean by connection before correction is practice your first response. I'm not saying if your kid disobeys, don't, have a discipline or have a conversation with them. I'm just thinking, think about your response. And bear with me for a second. Let me share something with my own parenting. 3 kids, my son is the oldest, and with my son, I look back at so much regret of how often I let anger react, how I let anger parent my kid. Because if he did something that was frustrating to me or disobedient, so often I lost it. And here's an interesting thing. I'm just being completely honest with you and transparent. Every time I lost it, even if it was like, like something I really, like a hill to actually die on, what would end up happening is an hour later, a day later, whenever, I'd end up coming back and just apologizing, sometimes in tears. I'm so sorry for the way I handled that. And sometimes it was like, I really, you snuck and did this, and I wish I would, but I wish I would have handled it better. It's okay, Dad. And what's amazing is often right then I'd be like, hey, tell me about what happened. And he would tell me. And sometimes it wasn't even as bad as I thought or whatever, and I listened. And now that I felt so terrible from doing that, I would deal with it so much better. I'm like, well, why'd you do that? And we'd have this amazing conversation, and we'd walk away with kind of like this plan of how it wasn't gonna happen again, and sometimes a punishment or whatever. But I always had to blow it first. And so I started asking myself, isn't there maybe a way that I could, not blow it? Grandma always said, count to 10. Well, I'd count to 10, and it was more like, a countdown from 10 to 1 and then blast off in my house. It didn't work, okay? But I started realizing, you know what? I don't got this. And I'm just gonna be honest with y'all. This is something I just had to absolutely give to God and say, God, I don't have this. You need to take this. And one of the tools I ended up using is at those moments, and by the way, you can use these in life with all kinds of different folks, but in those moments, I learned that I had to walk away. And so here's what this could look like with your kids. This could look like this, and maybe you even have to memorize this speech. But this is when your kid disobeys or sneaks or does something, it's saying, hey, you know what? You knew that being 12, I told you not to be on that social media, and I don't know how you got around that, that block I did on your phone. I thought it was safe or whatever, but I see that you have this social media up anyway. We found it. We need to talk about this, but I can't talk about it right now because I need to go pray. I just need to get my head on straight. And the reason I got to get my head on straight, and you look at your little kid, Chris, you say, it's because, Chris, I love you so much. I love you so much. And I care about you so much. And I don't want to lose my cool and say something stupid because I probably would. So I'm going to just go and just pray and try to get right with God to make sure that I don't do something stupid, because I think this is so important that we talk about this. So leave your phone, and why don't you go to your room and finish your homework. And in 3 days, when I'm got my cool, we'll talk, or however long it takes. And practice that speech. And give yourself time. You know what's really amazing? When you do that, all of a sudden you come back with the calm and the wisdom. Matter of fact, in my Parenting Generation Screen book, I actually talk about a plan that I use where I come back and I actually start asking them questions instead of preaching. And half the time when I ask those questions, also I discovered things where I realized, man, it was good that I discovered that before I started barking out punishment, because I didn't even know the whole story. If we blow it with our kids, you'll see it right on their face. They'll be like, Mom, Dad isn't safe. Ask yourself, are you approachable? I'm gonna go to the extreme here for a second. Let me tell the extreme stories. If your daughter got pregnant, would she come to you and talk to you about it? Or would she be like, mom, dad are gonna blow up. I spoke at a church where there was a girl with her 1-year-old sitting next to her. She was less than 20 years old. And as I asked her story and she shared with me, she shared how her parents kicked her out of the house because she got pregnant and she couldn't find a place to live. And she lived on the couch of an alcoholic because it was the only guy who would let her stay. She barely felt safe. And she went to the hospital by herself. She started raising this kid by herself. And then finally she went to this church, and this church kind of took her in because mom and dad were like, we're ashamed of you. And you know what? That's an extreme story. But let me tell you, there was times that I saw a look on my kid's face where they were looking like, Dad isn't safe. And that look on their face literally haunts me at night sometimes. That's why this principle of connection before correction is so important. If we don't have relationships with our kids, we're not gonna have the opportunities to talk with them about these important facts. And really, what do we want our kids to do? We want, by the time our kids are 18 and they go off to an army barracks, or they go off to college, or they start that tech school, or they move out with some friends, we want them to be making these decisions for themselves. Now, I'll ask you one question. Are you preparing them for that day? Or do you just have a bunch of rules where you're just sitting there and saying, here's what you're gonna do, and they've never made a decision for themselves? Well, those conversations, equipping them to start learning that, come through connection. And we need to have connection before correction. I spend a lot of time in this book about that. As a matter of fact, every single, I'd say, guideline that we talk about in this book, from no phones in the bedroom at night, waiting till you're 13 to have a phone, waiting to be on social media, all these principles, I then apply the principle of how do we do this with connection before correction? Instead of just coming in and barking out the orders, how do we connect with our kids first? So important principle, love to spend more time on it, but that would give me a beautiful excuse to just plug my book there. And see that? That's pretty cool, huh? Point number 4, move from reactive to proactive. See, some of us, I've been talking a lot about some of us who are too strict, but sometimes when we're raising our kids, many of us, we've kind of given our kids screens, we let them have lots of freedom, kind of not a lot of boundaries. And what we end up doing is we end up just reacting to all these tragedies that are happening. We find that this happened, it was terrible. We find that they snuck out. We find all these things that they're doing. We just have to react. And what I'm gonna share is we as parents can be proactive. And by being proactive, what I literally mean is we can set helpful boundaries, you know? And one of those might be as simple as saying something like, sorry, but you're not gonna have your phone in the bedroom at night. Let me put this in perspective really quick. Most of what we do in parenting falls into one of two categories, either bonding or boundaries. Think about it for a quick second, okay? Bonding would be anything that we do that is hanging out with our kids, rolling on the floor with our kids, talking with our kids around the old fire pit. Boundaries is, no, you can't have a phone now. You're 12. Sorry, you're not going to have it in your bedroom. And guess what? Good parenting is a good balance of both those. I've been in this workshop so far focusing a lot on bonding. We need our relationship with our kid. We need to find those communication arenas where they naturally open up. Hey, don't jump to correcting your kid. Make sure you have that connection first. And some of you are sitting there going, hey, California boy, you sound like one of those hippies that's raising your kids to do whatever they want. Let me be very clear. What we're talking about by being proactive here right now is let's talk about boundaries, because there's some very helpful boundaries, and some of these boundaries will actually even help us create these moments of conversation. So let me give you some examples here. And it's really hard when it comes to boundaries. You can get 10 different sets of parents up on the stage here. And if we literally brought 10 sets of parents from your church, we brought a dynamic single mom, we brought some grandparents who are raising their kids, some parents, 10 completely different groups who are doing a great job raising their kids, right? And we brought them up there, and if we went with a microphone and asked them and said, okay, at what age did you give your kids phones? You know what's interesting? You'd probably get 10 different answers. Maybe you'd start to see some common denominators, but you'd probably get 10 different answers. What age did you allow them to be on social media? Probably 10 different answers. Did you allow your kids to be on TikTok? 10 different answers. I mean, literally. Well, I guess there's only 2 different answers, yes or no, but 10 different people sharing that, yes or no. The fact is, when it comes to a lot of this advice on what boundaries, you're gonna get a lot of different input. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share you some facts. I'm gonna share some of the things that I've seen. And as a researcher, as a parent who's been at parent workshops and heard the stories from moms and dads across, these are kind of the common denominators that I've found that I think a lot of parents have found helpful. And maybe you'll find helpful as well. And so here's some realistic boundaries. I'm gonna start by saying limiting screen time is not a bad thing. And let me qualify it though really quick. Pretty much every expert out there will say that when your kid is small, you shouldn't plop them in front of a TV, because this is the years which they're really developing different things when it comes to communication, this and that. And if they just sit there watching nothing but TV, that you're kind of hindering that. And you could read report after report from really smart doctors talking about that. It's kind of a no-brainer, and most people agree on that. And then as they get a little bit older, all of a sudden, it's like, well, okay, if they're 5 years of age versus 5 to 7, maybe let them have 2 hours, but let it be educational programming, not too many moving stuff too fast. And I remember my daughter and us having this conversation is, okay, what about Bluey? What about Paw Patrol? What about, it's like, and let me tell you, it's hard. My daughter, she's a single mom, all right? Husband didn't come back from Afghanistan. She's raising him by herself. And there's times where when she's cleaning the house or whatever, it is just easier to be able to just slap him in front of Bluey, slap him in front of Paw Patrol. It is tough being a parent today. And to all of a sudden hear, only do that 2 hours a day? And she literally has limits of, I've read this, so this is what I'm gonna try to do. And the other times I'm gonna try to occupy him and hand him a mop, help. He's 3, he's not much help. But the thing is, this is tough. And so I talk about the different ages and all that kind of stuff in my parenting generation screen. Here's where it gets interesting. When it comes to teens and tweens, a lot of people don't disagree. All kinds of different people thinking different stuff. And I'll give you some examples. I'm Dr. Jean Twenge, who I really respect. She's done all kinds of amazing research. And she actually even will combine studies and say, look, here's 4 different studies that show that pretty much happiness and mental health are the highest at the half hour to the 2 hour mark of extracurricular digital media use. So just sitting down, jumping on a phone and doing whatever you want on a phone. Young people that spend between half an hour to 2 hours, those are the kids that are happiest. And literally, the more time you spend after that, mental health decreases. So she was one of those big advocates. And you hear a lot of those different studies. Interesting thing is, when studies when voices like hers were heard, literally some of the phone companies introduced things that, remember when the iPhone first came out, there wasn't the screen time feature where you can shut off their phone at a certain time at night. So some of these things started to emerge because people realized screen time actually affects young people. We're gonna talk more about that because screen time, I would say, is not the hill to die on. And you'll learn why in a second. So second boundary I wanna share with you is parents have passwords. Now, I know a lot of parents are like, Jonathan, duh. But let me tell you something. I hang out with young people on campus all the time, and I can't tell you how often young people are making fun of their parents' passwords. So I'm sure those are just other parents, not you. You don't have a password that's 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have a password that's your birthday or your anniversary or your husband's birthday. I'm sure that's not you. It's just these other parents who these kids are making fun of. Or, let's be realistic, you're washing dishes one night, your hands are in the soap, and your kid comes up and goes, I need the password to access this real quick for that. And you're like, and your hands are in the water, and you're like, okay, here's the password. 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, and you give the password, all right? Or you give your birthday, 0529, okay, wait, so you give it. And you go, I gotta remember to change that later, and you forget. Now your kids have the passwords. Realize that if you're gonna put some of these kind of parental controls in place, it's all about the password. So find something random, okay? And if your kids are actually listening to this right now, I'm about to give a tip on how to do this random, but now you can't use this tip because your kids are sitting right there. But here would be a good way to do it. Take a picture of your dad who's sitting in front of his 55 Chevy, and he's so proud, and you happen to see the license plate right below it, 1CXK302. Guess what? Have that as a saved picture, and you're just like, I love Pop. Look at Pop's right there. There's your password, right? Well, your kids aren't gonna know that, you know? Your neighbor's address. Use something random. If they're sitting right there, you better think of something different. But a lot of these controls are only as good as the passwords. Delay screen ownership. You guys, this is becoming something that and legislation is even talking about, is stop giving your kids phones till they're at least 13. It's probably one of the questions I get asked more than anything else is, what age is the right age to give my kid a phone? And here's the ironic thing, and I'm not making fun of you, I'm just saying this is the reality we live in. Most parents are like, well, I gave my kids a phone because it's just not safe, and what if they needed a ride home from school? Every one of their friends has a phone, so it's fine. And we made it, we did. And guess what? You can get them phones. There's actually cool phones, not even just flip phones, there's cool phones that you can get. They're just like, they look like a square or whatever and stuff, and it's just a phone. It's not social media. Your kids will probably be safe. Matter of fact, they're probably gonna be less safe if you hand them a phone with social media on it, because now fat naked guy's gonna come pick them up because he knows where they are because of snap maps. So what I'm just saying is the safety thing, just okay? I'm scaring people again, I'm really sorry. Don't run out of the room, don't flush your kid's phone down the toilet. The thing is, what age do you give your kid a phone? A lot of experts are asked this question. For example, the CEO and founder of Common Sense Media, Jim Steyer, he was asked this question, and he was given a politically correct answer. Well, it depends on the maturity. Da, da, da. And finally, people were like, Jim, what age were your kids? And he said, high school. Bill Gates, a guy who really likes tech, they asked him, when did you let your kids have a phone? High school, when they're 14. Interesting, bare minimum. According to the Child's Online Privacy Protection Act, your kids can't even be on social media without lying about their age until they're 13. And guess what? When you hand your kid a phone, the first thing they're gonna wanna get is social media. They're gonna do everything to have social media. I got a Scottish Terrier, okay? My Scottish Terrier is bred to find rodents. We had this mouse infestation at our house in the backyard. Luckily not in the house, but in the backyard. And every time we go out to take my little dog pee, there was mice scurrying going like this. He was just outside, just on the leash, just he's everything in him. I'm like, dude, just pee, okay? I know the mice are there. Ignore the mice. He's like, that's like when you hand a kid a smartphone, okay? And they don't get social media. They're just gonna be sitting there going, sorry, young people, it's exactly what you're like. So the thing is, don't give your 12-year-old a phone. First thing they wanna do is lie about their age and get a TikTok, And that's what most of the experts are saying. So delay screen ownership. And that relates to the next thing, which I already just talked about, no social media till 13. And by the way, if your kids argue with that, but if it's, hey, sorry, it's the law. Child's Online Privacy Protection Act, it's FTC. What am I gonna let you drive the SUV when you're 14? I can't, gotta be 16, gotta have sorry, it's the law. Use that one on them, all right? Limit social media time. We're gonna spend some time on this. And here's why. I mentioned earlier that a lot of researchers don't agree on the whole, look at number one there, limit screen time. Because some researchers will say, do you know that video game time is actually good for young people? These are the future astronauts. Do you know that there's no research out there that shows how much time they spend on Netflix, this and that? Oh, actually, there is research that shows that kids that spend too much time on video games have greater chance of obesity. Well, do you know that if you spend too much time on movies, this, or if they listen to these or watch these music videos, they're more likely to engage in sexual activity? No, these kids there's literally, it's almost like getting a room full of Republicans and Democrats and literally being okay, guys, what do you all agree on? There's complete opposite ways of looking at things. Well, Dr. Gene Twenge and Dr. Jonathan Haidt both got together right before COVID, and they said, hey, room full of people that disagree. What do we all agree on? What do we all agree on? Some of you guys might know the name Dr. Jonathan Haidt because he just came out with this book, The Anxious Generation. And legislators are literally changing laws because of the research of this guy, just to let you know who he was. Well, before that book came out, back in 2020, Dr. Gene Twenge and Jonathan Haidt took this room of people that disagreed and they said, okay, guys, forget what we disagree on. We disagree on video games, on Netflix, on screen time, and all this different stuff. What do we all agree on? And they literally put the data together smack middle COVID and started publishing this stuff. So this is from 20 to 21 that this stuff started coming out. And when these two guys put their research together, it was fascinating. And for a researcher like me, I was like my dog looking at the hill going, because I was like, oh my gosh. They literally said, we found 2 things we agreed on. I'm like, really? Because these guys never agree when it comes to screen time, whatever. And they're like, we all agreed. If you put all this research together, there is one overwhelming majority agreed on this with very little pushback. And here's what they agreed on. 1, there's really a mental health crisis engulfing adolescents, particularly girls in all the English-speaking countries. Everybody agreed on that. Something's going on with mental health. We don't know what, but something. Here's the second thing they agreed on. The evidence linking screen time to mental health problems, when you combine both genders together, is indeed weak and inconsistent. But when you limit the analysis to social media effects on girls, the link is much stronger and is surprisingly consistent. So here's what they found. Kids are more depressed. And if you try to blame it on screen time, Netflix, games, social media, music, the data isn't consistent. But if you narrow that focus to social media, and especially if you narrow the focus on girls and social media, so girls even more than guys, you start to see a lot of consistencies of how much time spent on social media affecting mental health negatively. We hearing this? This is what everybody agrees on, all right? So they made some suggestions from this study to parents. Back then, this is before Jonathan Haidt's book came out. Back then, they said parents should try to delay the day when their kids, especially daughters, get accounts on Instagram and other platforms where, listen to this, where people rate them and comment on their looks and their posts. So when there's comments about what you posted, that is what you need to be careful. Now, I'm just gonna make a quick comment here really quick. And that is that whenever people talk about screen time and how much time young people are spending, one of the most popular apps that young people like to spend time on is YouTube. Now, it's one thing if your kids are just watching funny videos on YouTube, but there's a lot of young YouTubers out there who are posting stuff on YouTube. And guess what happens when they post stuff on YouTube? You get likes, you get followers, you get comments. And that right there, likes, followers, and comments, is what's putting the pressure on young people today. Even if they're on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever that is. So consider that. They're saying, delay the day when your kids start being that YouTuber. I know parents, homeschool parents with innocent kids who are like, my kid's starting to make these creative Lego videos. I love it. He's only 8, he's only 10, and he's making these videos and he's posting them. But this kid is navigating comments and likes and followers. And it's a lot of pressure on young people. It's a lot of pressure. So as a matter of fact, they said they should talk with their kids about the dangers of these platforms. Good. That's what we've been talking about here today, engaging them in conversation. And they should consider tight time limits on their use of social media, such as 1 or at most 2 hours a day. So think about this. When it comes to social media, when I say social media, I mean something where you're posting something where people can like it, follow it, comment on it. So whether YouTube, whether TikTok, and some of these studies, you gotta be careful because the studies out there will be like, here's how much time they spend on social media. Here's how much time they'll spend on streaming videos. Here's how much time they'll spend on YouTube. Yeah, but are they influencers on these? Are they posting their own stuff? Because they're affected by what, people, how many followers they have. That puts pressure on them. How many likes they got. That puts pressure on them. The mean comments. We learned from the changes that TikTok made that they're even shutting off messaging because not only mean comments, but creepy comments, and people invite him to go meet him in a Walmart parking lot. So they're saying, watch out for this stuff. Now, here's what's interesting. When you look at, by the way, I just said, 1 at most 2 hours a day. Look at this really quick. Here's the apps that young people spend the most time on. TikTok alone, 1 hour and 52 minutes is the average amount young people spend on TikTok. 1 hour and 52 minutes. Then look down from there. I mean, you go to YouTube, 40 minutes, Instagram, you start to see the averages of times there. It's amazing how much time, a lot of young people are spending a lot of time already on there. And the experts are saying, first of all, they shouldn't even be on social media till later, till at least high school, and if they are, really try to watch how much time they spend on social media. Then he goes on, and he also says, school districts should help parents by strongly suggesting the norm that no kids get social media accounts until high school. By the way, we're starting to see legislators now who are, and literally, there's all kinds of different states that you're starting to see do this that are saying, let's now, they're passing laws, or school districts are starting to enforce, we're gonna now have no phones in schools because they're starting to listen to this stuff. I'll even show you an example of some proposed legislation. Age verifying users, getting permission from parents for users under than 18, giving parents access to kids' social media accounts. They're saying, making this just like literally laws. Providing parents with the right to sue big tech for financial damages if they do not obey the law. Not a big fan of that one. Prohibit big tech companies from using kids' data or addictive algorithms on platforms serving children. So they're really talking about noticing some of this stuff and putting this. And the reason I share this stuff with you, the reason I'm sharing this data is we as mom and dads and people that are raising this younger generation, we're constantly looking for what guidelines should we have with our kids? And here's what most of the experts are now saying. So when you look at these limit social media time, that's a huge boundary. If you're overwhelmed and you're saying, Jonathan, I've already let my kids have phones. I hate to say it, but they have phones too early. They are on it too much, and they're too young. If you could just do one thing, pay attention to this next boundary. Because people ask me all the time, I've been on interviews where they ask me, Jonathan, if you're a parent and you could have parents just have one rule in the house, what would it be? I'd say keep phones out of the bedrooms at night. Because after a parent workshop, I'll be at my back table, and every parent that comes up to me in tears and says, I got to tell you about my son. And they tell me about a story about their son who met someone online, and they were talking all night online, and this and that, and I just kind of note the phrase, all night. And then their daughter who met a predator and then was texting through the night, and all of a sudden snuck out in the night when they met, night. My son who games all through the night, won't turn it off, is having trouble with sleep, having this, night. I will have 18 conversations with parents, and the word all night or throughout the night will be in every single conversation. So here's just what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a lot of problems with phones, and kids could do lots during the day, but let me tell you something. Parents that are like 8 or 9 at night are like, hey, and it could take a sacrifice from mom and dad to be like, hey, we as a family are gonna start reading at 8 o'clock at night. We're gonna turn off screens, except on Monday nights when there's football, or whatever that is. You find that, hey, we're gonna turn off our individual screens, and if we wanna watch a family show together, all of us on one screen, we'll do that and then turn it off. I mean, you could do it whatever you want, but for sure, we're going to our bedrooms. Okay, everybody, let's throw it on the charger here. No phones in the bedrooms. And by the way, I'm not alone in saying this. That dude from Common Sense Media said it. National Sleep Foundation said it. Jonathan Haidt, talks about it all the time. Gene Twenge talks about it. Let me give you one of those examples of the night thing. Males aged 13 to 24, 72% of them go to porn on purpose at least once or twice a month. On purpose, they seek out porn. Well, when 8 out of 10 of them have a device in their phone all night. This is one of the things I talk about in my Guy's Guide to 4 Battles book, is I spend one of the 4 battles is sexual temptation. One of the battles is screens, the temptations with screens. And so 2 of those battles talk about this. Moms and dads, get a docking station, put it in your master closet, put that docking station right by your bedside, and then smash a light bulb and crunch it right on the floor, right next to it. Because that way, when your kids come in the middle of the night, okay, I'm kidding, don't really smash a light bulb, but the idea is kids will be like my terrier with, don't just put a docking station downstairs. They'll go downstairs and get it at 3 a.m., okay? Get rid of it, get rid of that temptation. In this book, The Anxious Generation, which is a fantastic book, Mimi was with me at the back table today, and she was like, oh my gosh, I read this book, and one of my daughters loved this book, and she was telling me all about it and stuff, and she's like, have you read it? And I was like, man, this is fascinating, because this is the guy, I quote him in several of my books before he was publishing this research, so I love what he just came out with. He's a scholar. This is a secular book. I don't know if you'll agree with all his premises, but this is the one that now I'd say legislators and people are listening to. And his theme of this book is this, that we're overprotecting children in the real world and underprotecting them online. If I were to summarize it, I would basically say that he's saying, hey, you're so worried about your kid climbing a tree and falling and breaking his arm, or getting on his bike because you think somebody's gonna snag him, that you hand him a screen and tell him to go in his bedroom where he's gonna meet far more dangerous people. That's kind of the summary of the book. And it's interesting because just quick spoiler alert, I'm gonna give you the Reader's Digest version. I think it's worth a read, by the way. He says 4 foundational reforms. And check this out. Are you starting to hear the same thing over and over again? Here's what he just came out with. And this is, I think, a couple years after my book. And I love his stuff. No smartphones before high school. We should give our kids basic text and call only phones until they're 14 years old. Sound familiar? No social media before 16. When preteens are subjected to endless algorithmically chosen content and comparisons with influencers, it could damage their self-worth permanently. Number 3, phone-free schools. So the pressure isn't on you, mom and dad, on your kid being the only kid, without a phone at school. And look at number 4. Interesting how different this one is from a lot of stuff we've been talking about. For far more unsupervised play and childhood independence, let your kids learn to develop social skills, overcome anxiety, and become self-governing young adults. And I will say I agree with that. So often we as parents step in and just kind of helicopter parent and hover over our kids and answer for them. Just with a close friend, I was asking their kid questions, and dad started answering all the questions for kid, so kid didn't have to answer. I thought, let your kid answer. And I didn't want to say it because he was a friend, but it's like, let your kid answer, So moving from reactive to proactive, there are some realistic boundaries, even if it starts with no phones in the bedroom. Or if your kids are younger than 13, maybe holding out and not giving them a phone yet. Maybe waiting on that social media. Moving from reactive to proactive. By the way, what's this look like? Let's put some real life into this. Your kid could come up to you and be like, it's gonna ask you real world questions. You're gonna go, oh my gosh, how do I answer this? So let's apply these principles. Your kid comes up and goes, Mom, can I download Be Real? And you don't know what Be Real is, maybe. And so what do? You're like, how do I know what Be Real is? So you sit there, and if you have no idea, then ready? Memorize this phrase right here. Say this. Mom, can I download this? Right? They ask that question. Here's the answer. I don't know. Let's check it out together. Memorize that. Say it with me. Ready? I don't know. Let's check it out together. Memorize that. Because if your kid wants to, download Be Real, maybe go to Google and search for, is Be Real app safe? And you know what? You'll probably get to the Be Real apps, safety page, and you might read all about it, and you'll find out that, it's actually this kind of cool app that's getting popular right now because it asks you to post these real pictures. They can't be altered. So a lot of kids are like, man, this is really real. But yet geolocation, when it first started, was on by default. So again, people could find out where your kids were and stuff. So it's just good to know that kind of stuff. And you could talk through your kid with that. But you could literally learn it by a Google search. So if your kid comes and goes, hey, can I download Visco? And you're like, I don't know, Jonathan didn't talk about Visco in the parent workshop. We just talked about TikTok and Instagram. So, Mom, can I download Visco? You're going to say, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I heard you. Thank you. That was good. Mimi was really loud. I could hear her through the camera there. I don't know. Let's check it out together. So Google, is VSCO app safe? And next thing you know, you'll get on the site. You'll find, maybe you'll end up on Common Sense Media's page or the Plugged In page, and you're gonna find a review of it. And you'll hear that, hey, it's actually very artsy. Sometimes there's some sensual stuff. And you can read about it, and you can make that decision with them. Think about this. We're trying to raise kids that someday are gonna make these decisions for themselves. If they come up and they're simply like, can I do this? No, why? Because I said so. They're learning nothing. But I don't know, let's check it out together. You read about it, then turn to them and say this, what do you think? What do you think? Guess what? When they get to that college dorm, when they get to that Army barracks, they're not gonna call you up and ask you if they can watch the new HBO show. They're gonna make that decision for themselves. Are you equipping them for that day? So when it comes to these things, Dad, can I play Fortnite? What if we said, I don't know. Let's check it out together. And you get down with them and you play Fortnite and check it out. You're like, wow, and you start deciding whether you think it's cool that, who are these strangers? What does that talk like? Man, we're shooting a lot of people. I mean, you're gonna have to make that decision for yourself. I talk a lot about these things in my Teens Guide for Social Media books, that one and the Teens Guide to Face-to-Face. I write these as a guy who speaks a lot of school assemblies. I found that there's a lot of parents who let their kids do whatever they want. So my goal with these books is to give them information so they can make smart decisions. So I tell them stories about some of these girls sneaking out and what happened. I tell stories about people meeting people online, and not just horror fear tactics, but true stories about what's going on out there and mental health studies. And I end with small group discussion questions. So if they want to discuss it in a youth group, or if mom and dad want to take them out for breakfast and say, hey, read chapter, this chapter on predators, and then let's talk about it afterwards. Mom and dad could ask those questions, And the reason why is we want to get as many opportunities to where if we finally decide and say, you know what, I don't know, the more I look at this, and you showed me TikTok, and it seems really fun, and there are some, some pretty fun, innocent, wiener dog videos that are really funny, but I think the answer is no. When we tell our kids no, what's the next word out of their mouth? Why, right? Don't say because I said so. When they say why, it's the number one question, by the way, kids will ask when you say no. Just realize that why is an opportunity for dialogue. The why is probably more important than the boundary. Instead of just saying no, you know what's better? Why there's the no. Here's what I'm concerned about. And I literally, in my book, Parenting Generation Screen, every one of those things of, do you keep your phone in your bedroom? What age do you get your phone? Social media, all these things, I always, when I talk about the connection before correction, I talk about asking them, what do you think? And asking them that question. What do you think you should do? I told you to memorize the, I don't know, let's check it out together. Once you check it out, before you say, and the answer is no, I'd say, what do you think you should do? Start getting them to practice that. And that's all, part of this, a part of the boundaries, part of these conversations. But I promised you 5, count them, 5 tips. And so let me give you number 5 here, and that's this. And I wish I would have thought of this one years ago. And that is, don't become so focused on blocking the lies that you forget to talk about truth. In Psalms 78, it says this: we will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. We won't hide these truths from our children. I fear that when I was on the parent workshop scene, that I was much more with my kids talking about this song and those lyrics and this and that. And I was so busy pointing out the lies that I think it actually hindered how much I was able to share the truth with them. I think I would do less pointing out of lies and more talking about truth. Less talking about how foul Cardi B's lyrics are and more not skipping that part in the Bible that talks about God's plan for a man and a woman and sex, and sex and marriage. Sometimes we skip through those parts. I'll just be honest. I had 10 titles on the back table today. 10 titles, and one of them was talking to your kid about sex. I sold out of all, and there's still a stack that big of the books about talking to your kid about sex, because every parent's like, oh, my kid's not ready for that yet. Oh, really? Do you know what your kid's hearing from the apps and the music and you think is not ready yet? I'm not saying point out the lies. I'm saying, have you talked to your kid about the truth? Have you opened up Proverbs 5 where, the writer talks about enjoying the breasts that you enjoyed as a young man, and I won't enjoy the breasts of the promiscuous woman? A lot of us are like, oh, I wouldn't want to talk about that, passage with my kid. I think you do. Because if you got a young man, he's thinking a lot about enjoying breasts. And wouldn't it be cool to be like, hey, do you know that God's design is for you to enjoy someone's breasts? Someone with breasts. And I know for those of you got kids sitting there, this is a parent workshop. I'm sorry that you brought your kids sitting there, but they're going to hear this. It says right there, it says, enjoy the wife of your youth and let her breasts satisfy you at all times. It's in the Bible. Are we going to edit the Bible? Should we tear that page out? Or should we talk to our kids about truth? The fact is, parental controls aren't going to raise our kids. We could sit there and we could set all the parental controls on this device as much as possible. And when really one of the better things to do is get them into that app right there, get in the Bible, get some Bible reading plans with them, If our kids have their phones in the bedroom at night, wouldn't it be cool if they were reading their Bible? And by the way, I'm not saying let them have their phones in their bedroom at night. I'm not. Get them an analog Bible. It's got pages. It's really cool. You can get them a light. They can actually read it, Center for Bible Engagement said this: someone who engages in Scripture 4 or more times a week looks radically different from the life of someone who does not. In fact, the lives of Christians who do not engage in the Bible most of the week are statistically the same as the lives of non-believers. This is just fascinating stuff, okay? I don't want to be judgy, I don't want to be anything, but just look at these numbers for a quick second. If someone who engages in the Bible 4 or more times a week, so someone who's really reading and like, what does this psalm have to say to me? What does the story of Jesus today have to say to me? Someone's doing that 4 times a week or more, 228% more likely to share their faith with others, 407% more likely to memorize Scripture, 59% less likely to view pornography, 30% less likely to struggle with loneliness. A lot of us are so focused on porn blocks. Let me show you a secular study. This is from Common Sense Media. 5 ways to block porn on your kids' devices. Ready? Here's how they say it. You could set all the blocks, filters, and parental controls in the universe, and not only will your kids still see porn, you still have to talk to them about what porn is, why it exists, and why it's not for them. You guys, don't be so focused on blocking the lies that you forget to talk about the truth. And if you don't know where to start, you think of Wisdom 101. Okay, good. How about Psalm 101? Psalm 101, I'll sing of your love and justice. I'll praise you with songs. I will be careful to live a blameless life. When will you come to help me? I keep talking about how in my books I have these discussion questions. Here's some discussion questions for you. Open up Psalm 101, read this, and be like, I will be careful to live a blameless life. What's he talking about? What's a blameless life look like today? When will you come to help me? I will lead a life of integrity in my own home. I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. What's that look like today? This isn't us preaching. Let me show you vile and vulgar. Vulgar is this. No, what if we're just like, hey, what's that look like today? What are some of the vile and vulgar things that people look at today? How can we refuse to look at that? Maybe we go to Psalm 19. How can I know the sins lurking in my heart? Cleanse me from these hidden faults. Keep your servant from these deliberate sins. Don't let them control me. Hey, what's that mean, to not let a sin control you? Then I'll be free of guilt and innocent of great sin. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. When your kids are young, it's a great time to get them memorizing scripture. And wouldn't it be cool if that was in their minds as they're thinking about some of the stuff they're navigating, as they're navigating that TikTok page? Don't become so focused on lies that you forget to talk about truth. You guys, there's some resources out there. If you go, one place you can catch me now is I'm actually on the Plugged In team, and I do a podcast called The Plugged In Show, and I do these little radio spots, so you can catch me there a little bit. My website's called becomingscreenwise.com. But honestly, there's some great resources out there. The best one is the Word of God, and I pray that you get in there. And as God changes us and we start to feel his grace and mercy, the more that love flows through us, the more it's going to flow out to our kids. I did bring some books today, and many of you bought them this morning, but let me show you some of the ones you could pick up on Amazon. My Parenting Generation Screen is my most recent book that's about all this. It has some of the research, including Dr. Jonathan Haidt's research, where he put all that research together and said, what do they agree on? Here's that book I told you about, the If I Had a Parenting Do-Over, fascinating book where I said, here's 7 vital changes I would make if I was parenting today. The 52 ways to connect with your smartphone-obsessed kid. This is a bunch of ideas as a family who are trying to get together and experience in a world so full of screens. How can we get face-to-face connections? And then some of us, we might not even realize how much our kid is being bullied online or mean comments about them and how much it affects them. And how do we react to that? What do we do? Do we jump to protect them really quick? What's that look like? Great book for parents and teachers. So those are books for parents. I brought some books for young people too. Here's one my daughter and I wrote together that is the Teen's Guide to Face-to-Face Connections in a Screen-to-Screen World. Great book to hand your daughter, hand your son, and say, read this, and let's talk about one of the chapters next Thursday at breakfast. And there's discussion questions if you want to use them there. Same with this one. That's the first one I wrote on the same subject. Different stories, different stats. They're a couple years apart. Same exact thing. And being wise with your screen. What's that look like? And it's geared towards young people for them to make their own decisions on that. If your kids don't like reading anything as a family or whatever, but you'd love to do a family devotions of some type, my friend Greg said, this is the only family devotions my kids would do. Ready? The Zombie Apocalypse Survival Guide for Teenagers. This is, ready? The story of 3 teenagers surviving in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a fictional story. It's not real. And their parents are gone. And they're out there on their own making decisions. And every time they're making a decision, they're like, what is the right thing to do? And it's a lot of, I'd say it's a PG book because they get in different situations where they're encountering stuff and they're trying to decide what is right, what is wrong. I really geared it towards middle school and high school kids, and it's got discussion questions at the end of each chapter. So that's what I got, folks. As a matter of fact, and I had a pack today, and I appreciate that we kind of sold out on those. We offered some deals there. Jump on Amazon, jump wherever you buy books and get those. You guys, thank you so much for coming to Parenting Generation Screen. We wanted to respect you and your time and get this done in 90 minutes or less. And hopefully that's what we've done for you. Debbie can't stop us. But Debbie, please come to California and drop some rain on us. We need it. You guys, more than anything else, remember, you can't do this alone. The best parenting advice I can give you is to fall on your face before God and say, God, I can't do this on my own. Please change me, change my heart. And as God extends his grace on you, because we all need it, I know I need it, it's only when he does that to us that love overflows to our kids, and they'll see that. They'll see that genuineness. I don't even know if genuineness is a word, but they'll see it in your lives. And that's what will make a difference parenting more than any other rule or any trick or anything you do. Let your kids see that authentic relationship with God in your lives. You guys, thanks so much.